Here's another idea for an episode of Free Will, Science, and Religion. What we could do is talk about three different kinds of freedom. Because George and I did an episode about, free will versus political freedom and how they're not the same thing. But Mitch, in an email, said something about, freedom of action being a different thing than freedom of will. And I think there's a case to be made for that. I think there can be a distinction between free will, freedom to act on your existing desires, which is what I would call freedom of action. And political freedom is more about, can you do a certain thing without being sent to jail? Like, are you free to say what you honestly think? You say your thoughts and your feelings without being sent to jail for saying something. So political freedom means that you are free to tell people that you don't believe in free will, or that you don't believe in God, or that you're free to say honestly what you think. So that's political freedom of speech. But freedom of action would mean, are you mute? Like, do you physically have the ability to speak or to write something? Are you physically capable? Because if you're mute, you can't speak. And if you don't have any fingers, you can't type on a keyboard. So that's the kind of freedom of action that's very important. The freedom to physically do that which you already desire. And I call that freedom of action. But free will is something entirely different than freedom of action, or freedom politically, like freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom of the press or whatever, that kind of freedom. Free will, as we talk about in our podcast, is like basically that you could have chosen to do otherwise, and that you're free to choose your will, choose your desires, that you could just choose to change your desires at any time, which is really insane because, everything's causally determined, and we cover that in every episode, just about. We cover that everything that we're doing now, there's a reason or a cause for it. The causal regression extends to before we were born, before we were conceived even. And then acausality, true randomness, things happening for no reason, means that we didn't make it happen either. It just happened without a human choosing it. So there's no free will, no such concept exists, but there's still the concept of freedom of action, that you're free to speak something if you've got the mouth to do it. And there's political freedom. You can speak what you want, or you can do certain things without being sent to jail. So there's these three different kinds of freedom, and only two of them exist. So this is kind of complicated, but I really want to do an episode of this in a podcast. So I'm going to send this video to my co-host and see what they think about the idea of these three different kinds of freedom. And we'll all share what we think of these. Okay, so that's all for now. Bye.